21 miles. That's the width of the most important stretch of water on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of the world's oil sails through it every single day, and for 3.5 months in 2026, it was shut. But here's the twist. The shock didn't hit the gas pump first. It hit the one number the Federal Reserve swore it had under control. This is how 21 miles of water rewired the entire economy. Pull up a map of the Persian Gulf. At its mouth sits a narrow channel between Iran and Oman, the Strait of Hormuz. At its tightest, it's just 21 miles across, and the actual shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide in each direction. That's it. That's the doorway for the oil that powers Asia, Europe, and a huge slice of the world economy. Every day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil and a third of the planet's seaborne liquefied natural gas squeeze through that doorway. No pipeline can replace it at scale. If Hormuz closes, there is no backup plan that works fast. For decades, that made it the single most watched choke point in global energy. Traders called it the world's most important valve. And everyone quietly assumed it would never actually close, because closing it would be too catastrophic for anyone to risk. For decades, that assumption held. Tankers moved, oil flowed, and the price of crude stayed boring. So how did the unthinkable finally happen? And why did almost no one price it in until it was too late? In February 2026, the Iran war broke out. Within days, the fighting reached the water. Attacks hit energy infrastructure across Iran and several Gulf states, and traffic through the Strait of Hormuz collapsed to almost nothing. The International Energy Agency called it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not one of the largest, the largest. Bigger than the 1973 embargo. Bigger than the Gulf War. Roughly 1/5 of the world's daily oil supply simply stopped moving. Tankers anchored and waited. Insurers pulled coverage for the region. Shipping rates exploded. And the oil that did get out took the long way around, adding weeks and cost to every barrel. The strait stayed effectively shut for 3.5 months. And the deal that finally ends it is being signed this very weekend. The peace agreement that reopens Hormuz. But as we'll see, the damage may already be locked in. Because a closed strait isn't just a shipping story. The moment those barrels stopped flowing, a countdown started, one that would end in the marble halls of the Federal Reserve. The first domino was the one everyone could see at the gas station, the price of oil. Before the war, Brent crude was sleepy, around $70 a barrel. Then Hormuz closed, and the price did what prices do when 1/5 of supply vanishes overnight. By March, Brent averaged around $105. By April, $115. And the scariest forecasts on Wall Street weren't even talking about those numbers. Goldman and others modelled a path to $200 a barrel if the strait stayed shut through the summer. $200. At that level, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, plastics, fertilizer, everything downstream of a barrel of oil, reprices violently. Now, oil is volatile. Spikes happen. Normally a price shock fades. Traders look through it, and the broader economy shrugs it off. That's the comforting story economists tell about energy. But this shock didn't fade fast. It sat there for months. And when an oil shock lasts that long, it stops being an oil story. It seeps into everything. It becomes an inflation story. Which brings us to that number the Fed swore it had under control. Here's the mechanism most people miss. Oil isn't just what you pump into your car. It's a raw input for almost everything. The trucks that move your groceries, the planes that move packages, the chemicals in your packaging, the fertilizer that grows your food. So when crude stays elevated for months, the cost leaks through the entire supply chain on a delay. Economists even have a rule of thumb. Every 10% rise in oil adds about 0.2 of a percentage point to headline inflation. Stack enough of those up, and you get a wave. And that's exactly what the data showed. US inflation had been drifting down toward the Fed's 2% target. Then the oil shock hit. Headline inflation jumped from 2.4% in February to 3.4% in March, and kept climbing. By May, it hit 4.2%, the hottest reading in 3 years. The Dallas Fed estimated the war alone added more than a full 1.5 to inflation, annualized, in a single quarter. That's the loop closing. The strait that almost no one was watching became the inflation wave that everyone was feeling, and an inflation wave that big lands on exactly one desk: the Federal Reserve's. Rewind to the start of 2026. Wall Street was almost unanimous. The Fed's next move was a rate cut. Inflation was cooling, the economy was steady, and traders were pricing in easier money all year. The oil shock detonated that entire forecast. You cannot cut interest rates into 4% inflation, not without risking the one thing the Fed fears most: that high prices get baked into people's expectations and stay there. So the bets didn't just shrink, they flipped. By mid-2026, traders went from pricing rate cuts to pricing a rate hike, with the odds of a December hike jumping towards 70%. The Fed's next move reversed direction entirely, and the timing could not be sharper. This Wednesday, the Fed meets, and it's the first meeting chaired by Kevin Warsh, a known inflation hawk. Almost no one expects a hike at this exact meeting. Rates will likely hold around 3.75%. But the message Warsh sends about what comes next is what markets will hang on. The era of the rate cut is over. The question now is whether they hike. So where does that leave us right now this week? The peace deal is being signed. Hormuz reopens, and oil has already started falling. Brent slid back toward $85 on the news. So the crisis is over, right? Not so fast. Reopening the strait fixes the supply of oil. It does not instantly unbake the inflation that's already worked its way into prices. Rent, wages, services, insurance, these are sticky. They rise fast and fall slow. That's the cruel lag at the heart of this whole story. The oil price can round trip in weeks. The inflation it caused and the Fed's response to it can linger for a year or more. The barrels are moving again, but the Fed is still staring at 4% inflation and a hawk in the chair. The strait is open. The shock isn't over. It's just moved from the shipping lane to the policy desk. So here's the whole chain in one breath. 21 miles of water close. A fifth of the world's oil stops. Crude rockets from $70 toward $115, with $200 on the table. That cost leaks through the supply chain and inflation climbs from 2.4 to 4.2%. And the Fed, which spent all year planning to cut, slams into reverse and starts threatening to hike. One narrow strait, half a world away, rewired the cost of your groceries and the interest rate on your mortgage. That's the real lesson of 2026. In a connected economy, there's no such thing as a local shock. A choke point you've never heard of can end up setting the price of everything. The strait is open again. Watch what the Fed says Wednesday, because that's where this shock is still echoing. If this connected the dots for you, subscribe. That's the whole point of this channel, making the machinery of markets make sense. Next up, what a hawkish Fed actually does to your portfolio. Thanks for watching.